Russia has invaded NATO airspace twice in the last week. First in Poland with 19 drones, and now in Estonia with actual fighter jets, proving an undeniable and clear sign of provocation and escalation. This comes merely weeks after the leaders of Iran, North Korea, Russia, and India met in China for their military parade, where they were caught speaking about typical dictator stuff, world domination, immortality, and posturing to the world that they are ready to challenge United States hegemony. This has prompted Donald Trump to announce that he wants to reclaim Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan that Biden just handed over to the Taliban, because despite his best intentions to bring this war in Ukraine to a close, he's realizing that this situation is probably not going to get better. In fact, it's probably going to get worse. As always, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You guys know I am committed to bringing you the most important news. But let's hear about Russia flying jets over NATO airspace for 12 entire minutes. Take a look.
All right, there's more breaking news we're following. 3 Russian fighter jets have just entered into Estonia's airspace without permission earlier this morning, that according to Estonia's foreign ministry. Officials say the jets stayed in their airspace for some 12 minutes. Estonia borders Russia and is a key member of NATO. Its foreign minister called the move by Moscow unprecedentedly brazen. That's a direct quote. All this comes as U.S. and Western intelligence officials are still trying to determine whether Russia intentionally flew drones over Polish airspace earlier this month. Joining us here in the situation with CNN's Katie Bo-Lillis. Walk us through, Katie Bo, this new reporting on what's going on.
Well, Wolf, we're just over a week from 19 Russian drones entering Polish airspace.
Poland, the key NATO ally as well.
Precisely so. And U.S. and Western intelligence officials are still deeply divided over whether that incursion was accidental or whether it was intentional, perhaps an effort to probe Western air defenses, right?
Since the video I made covering the military parade in China, this is what's happened. Russia launched its largest attack against Ukraine of the entire war. They've invaded NATO airspace twice. France told its hospital system to start preparing for war, and North Korea is still sending more troops to fight with Russia against Ukraine. What Russia is doing here is testing the resolve of NATO to see if it's actually the big, strong, mighty alliance that keeps the world order in check, or if, like the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain it's merely feeble politicians who are more interested in posturing than actually standing up for their own sovereignty in a serious way. And while NATO politicians are busy deliberating whether the 19 drones that entered Polish airspace was accidental or not, Russia is making it clear with this newest provocation in Estonia that they're simply trying to test the readiness, the response, and the willingness of the NATO alliance. And if the entire Democrat Party wasn't hell-bent on accelerating the downfall of America, they would understand that Donald Trump's aggressive and heavy-handed use of tariffs to bring manufacturing back to America is a matter of national security, not just for our own self-preservation, but the preservation of the entire free world. Now, all of my history buffs will know, one of the key reasons the United States was so successful in World War II was because we built more ships than the rest of the world combined by a multiple of 6. And our current lack of production capabilities puts us at a major disadvantage to defend the current world order if a global conflict were to ever break out. This next clip shows the chilling reality of how much our production capability has truly eroded.
In the late afternoon of June 30th, 2018, the Daniel K. Inouye was officially launched from its shipyard in Philadelphia. This was the first in a line of 5 highly advanced Aloha-class container vessels commissioned for the Matson Shipping Company. Capable of carrying the equivalent of 3,220 20-foot shipping containers, they are each going to be tied for the largest merchant ships ever produced by the USA. These ships have become the pride of the Philly shipyard that will be producing them, and they would be an incredibly impressive achievement, except for the fact that on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, shipyards like Hanwha Ocean in South Korea were building vessels 5 times as large. Oh, and in the same time it's taken the Philadelphia shipyard to build just 2 of these vessels, The Korean yards have built more than 50 of a new class of mega freighters that now dominate global trade routes.
After World War II, we outsourced all of our critical production capability to the rest of the world at the expense of America, because we thought if we enriched the rest of the world and created an interconnected global economy, nobody would be willing to go to war with each other. And in this utopia of world peace, it wouldn't matter if we couldn't produce the things we needed to sustain ourselves. We could just import them from other markets. Well, South Korea produces 50 times the amount of ships the United States can, and China produces 3 times the amount of South Korea. Russia has spent the last 3 years turning their entire economy into a military production powerhouse, pumping out tens of thousands of low-cost drones per month. The United States can do none of that. So if a conflict were to ever break out, the enemies could sink our entire naval fleet with hundreds of thousands of low-cost drones, and we would not be able to repair our ships or even produce new ones. China would crank out ships at a rate that would blow our mind, and the Russians would just continue to crank out drones at a rate that we couldn't keep up with. And they understand this reality. Donald Trump understands this reality. That's why his push to reshore manufacturing wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't patient, it was aggressive and immediate, because the existential threat to America and the global order is imminent. And that's why India, being at that military parade and part of this evil alliance, is even more frightening. Because between China and India, they have almost 3 billion people. And if all those people went to China, worked in the factories, those factories were converted to wartime manufacturing, they would be able to produce armaments at a rate that the entire combined NATO alliance couldn't compete with. And as we see in the Russia and Ukraine conflict, modern warfare is about high volume, low cost weaponry, not expensive, high quality tech that the United States is known for. But while NATO countries want to be tepid and measured in determining if the drones over Poland were accidental or not, Russia sending in their fighter jets clearly gives them the answer to that question.
And so one U.S. military official that I spoke to really put the odds at 50-50 either way. The problem now, of course, is how do you respond if you are NATO, if you don't know whether this was intentional or not? What we did hear from senior officials, both here in the United States and in Europe, is either way, whether it was intentional, whether it was accidental, it suggests a really worrying increase in the tolerance for risk that Russia is willing to take.
If it were accidental, I think this second incident now with Estonia, another NATO ally, and Russian jets flying over and entering that airspace, that would seem to confirm it wasn't accidental.
That's certainly going to be brought to bear on the analysis, and I think you're going to see a lot of certainly European nations who already believed that this was intentional saying, look, this is just further evidence.
Yeah. Now, I'm not advocating for war. I understand the severity of it. I understand the real life death and consequences that comes with it. But the point of NATO is to be so strong, so fierce, that it deters people from even trying. And Russia's trying to see if that's what it actually is, or if it's just a bureaucratic organization that has a lot of bark and no actual bite.
I would put the odds actually at more 70-30 or 60-40 that the Russians did this intentionally. Now, it is absolutely possible that there was jamming involved, and the way to determine that is whether or not Ukrainian jamming efforts were underway at that particular moment in time, or even Polish jamming efforts. So if there was nothing like that going on at that time, then you can pretty much determine that this was an intentional effort. When it comes to the Estonian situation with 3 fighter jets, that is an obvious offensive play by the Russians. What they're doing is they're testing the air defenses of the Estonians. They're looking at the way in which the Estonians would respond to an incursion, and the fact that they stayed in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. That's a very long time, relatively speaking. Small country, doesn't take long to fly from one end to the other in a fighter jet. They would be doing this intentionally to determine what the Estonians have have and how they would deploy it.
The whole reason there hasn't been a stronger response to the Ukrainian invasion is because we all said, well, it's not a NATO country. Vladimir Putin will never try a NATO country. And now we're not doing anything to show him that there are severe and real consequences to invading NATO airspace and sovereignty. If the only possible way the United States has access to a somewhat serious shipbuilding capacity is through our alliances with South Korea and Japan, well, those relationships become meaningless if those allies don't believe that we actually have their backs. That's why the response to Russia invading NATO airspace is important. That's why the United States' response to China's aggression against Taiwan is important, because we intentionally created a system where we don't produce the things we need, but our allies do. But if our allies believe our alliance is in name only and not in action, why would Japan and South Korea align with us when they're right next to China? And Trump is taking this threat seriously. That's why he announced while he was in the United Kingdom his plans on retaking Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Take a look.
President Trump said during remarks with the UK Prime Minister yesterday, he wants Afghanistan's Bagram Air Base back.
We were going to keep Bagram, the big air base, that one of the biggest air bases in the world. We gave it to them for nothing. We're trying to get it back, by the way. Okay, that could be a little breaking news. We're trying to get it back because they need things from us. We want that base back. But one of the reasons we want the base is, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons.
This is one of the largest air bases in the world that the United States spent 2 decades building up. And Joe Biden just handed it over to the Taliban after getting 13 service members killed. This weak incompetence is the primary reason why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place. The United States military is only a threat if our enemies think it will actually be used. Peace through strength means that we maintain global peace because our enemies know the prospect of challenging the United States is futile. And Joe Biden disrespected our military and turned it into a transgender DEI social justice project, not a military focused on high standards and lethality. And now Donald Trump wants to retake one of our key strategic advantages in the Middle East. But the Taliban responded to Donald Trump's announcement and said, well, they're not willing to give it up. Take a look.
The Taliban says, look, we're willing to talk to the United States, but any future military presence in Afghanistan is a no-go.
Okay, so two sides to every pancake. What's the Taliban saying? This is from their ambassador in Qatar about the United States. Pretty weighted statement on their side. If they want good relations, investment in Afghanistan, trade, normal diplomatic relations, they are welcome. But if they entertain covetous aims whatsoever, then they, speaking of the U.S., need to go through the history of Afghanistan once more, from the era of the British invasion down to the recent U.S. invasion. They will learn a lot. That is from the ambassador of the Taliban there in Qatar.
So because of Joe Biden, the Taliban seized our airbase. They seized $100 billion of United States military equipment, paraded it through the streets of Afghanistan as victors, and are now emboldened and defiant because our president was intent on weakening the United States in every way possible. Joe Biden undermined the strength, the prosperity, the sovereignty, the security of the United States, all to implement a radically progressive ideology that believes weakness and compassion are the ultimate forms of virtue. And now it's led to global tensions being at the highest level since the Cold War, all while the United States is more divided than it's ever been. We know Russia and China's goal is to dethrone the United States as the global superpower and destroy Western civilization's control over the world order, which ironically is the same exact goal of the American left. And instead of sneering and undermining Donald Trump's attempt at maintaining United States prosperity and might, Democrats could actually work with Donald Trump and preserve our way of life, which would stop Russia from escalating their attacks on NATO. But here we are. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on those notification bells so you never miss a video. And I will see you guys in the next one.